Fantastic. Mm. Mm-hmm. Ooh, hello, can you hear me? Mm-hmm. Why is Zoom so complicated? Make sure everyone's unmuted. Astera, can you hear me?
Hey!
Hey.
Sorry, I saw you weren't here yet, so I ran in the other room just quickly. How's it going?
Yay! Oh, I'm so glad. I thought maybe we were on different time zones. I was like, uh-oh. I think she lives in Colorado or something now.
No. I was in New Mexico for a long time, but I am not anymore.
All right. Well, I haven't purchased the Zoom yet, so let's get the party started.
Sorry?
I said, I wanted to make sure I knew how to pronounce your name because I remember you as Robin and I haven't, is it Astera?
Yeah. So it looks like you're already recording this.
Yeah, and I'll edit all that out.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, don't worry. Yeah, I've got an editor. Don't worry.
Yeah, so it's Astera Ilhiana Magdalena.
Perfect. Okay. And the Magdalena, is that because you're part of the Blue Rose lineage
Yes.
that I was reading about? Cool. I'm super curious about that. I kind of wanted to start there, but what I can do is I can introduce you. So today we have Asteria Ilhiana Magdalena on the show.
Astera.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, yeah.
You say it prettier.
Astera, yeah.
Astera, yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And she's an international published author and teacher and healer. And I have been following you ever since my friend Daniel was like, Dawn, I met this young woman and she is magical. And I think you would love her. So I've just kind of been following you ever since and going, oh, there's my temple priestess sister. There's my temple Magdalena priestess sister. And I didn't really have an intention to start a podcast until the beginning of the year. My teacher was like, you're going to start a podcast. And I thought, oh my gosh, I enjoyed yours so much. Are you still doing your podcast?
Yeah, so hold on. Are you going to tell me when we start recording, like properly?
We're just going for it right now.
Okay.
Yeah, we're just going.
Good to know. So I do still have a podcast. I took a little hiatus, a little like winter siesta, for it's been like 5 months now. But I went through a huge transformational process myself. So I have rebranded the podcast. It was Woman Untamed. It's now Woman Illuminated. Not that much different, but very intentional around bringing forth some more of the Magdalene mysteries, the feminine Christ teachings, and really for me, the Christed teachings around union more so than just Magdalene stuff. A lot of that topic, that name is getting a little trendy right now, which is good. But yeah, so it's Woman Illuminated, and it's everywhere. It's on iTunes and Spotify, and I think anywhere else you could find it.
And you have amazing guests. I've thoroughly enjoyed your show. And I've thoroughly enjoyed watching your alchemy process from what you've shared. You've shared some really, I know you had the Conscious Babe Academy and you had these other things. And then I noticed through social media that you moved, and I'm not sure if you want to share any of your alchemical process, because I know I was being prepared for this new shift too. What was that like for you as Magdalena?
Well, so I want to say, first of all, that the term Magdalena refers also to the order of Magdalena, which is kind of like a field of consciousness that exists at this time for people who carry that in their cells, which in my opinion is really everyone that feels connected to it. But it's not necessarily associated with specifically just the individual Mary Magdalene herself. There's quite a large number of us that are kind of anchoring different things. So the alchemical process that my entire life has been one, I feel like. I'm sure that resonates with a lot of people. But over the past, I would say 9 months in particular, I left a very twin flame sort of partnership last year that was very, very intense and brought up quite a lot. And so I entered into basically a tantric celibacy journey that I'm still in and just kind of closing out a little bit, where I went into my cells and my being, and I went in and basically dissolved and transmuted a lot of past life karma, a lot of old vows that I had taken, especially from being a temple priestess, and collapsed that out of my field. A lot of imprinting around narcissistic partners and stuff from my like very human childhood, but also that is so collective for women. Just got to learn a lot about myself. And so the process that I went through was extremely intense. And I also went into the deepest part of my personal pain and mythology in this lifetime, which, like so many others of us who bring forth some of these feminine Christed teachings, my entry onto the earth plane was extremely tumultuous and chaotic and painful and involved a lot of abusive experiences. And I had never fully entered into what I could only call like this sort of portal of darkness to meet with, uh, yeah, some of the darkest energy that exists in existence, to face it and come out on the other side. And that's the point at which I was basically implored to take my true name, and did so. And that caused another cataclysmic wave of shifting in my own experience. And it's been a process of acclimating to walking in the world with that higher self embodiment. And just from a very grounded place as well, I underwent preparations to go to Egypt in February, where a group of 6 other sisters and I held the 7 gates and basically ceremonially kind of opened the way for a lot of things to happen this year. I didn't know that's why I was going, of course, but that is essentially what happened. So that's the process that I went through in short, and it was insane, and completely just bananas. But here we are.
That is literally the Phoenix Rising story. Like,
Yeah.
you alchemized so much. And so for, a lot of my clients that I work with, they are always asking about twin flame and alchemy. And one of the things that I help facilitate, as it sounds like in a similar dynamic as you, probably different tools, is that inner alchemy. And so what you're saying is that you were kind of doing that for the last, you've been doing that your whole life, but the last 5 months has been that inner, when I asked you like, what's alive, what's juicy, what's present? You're like, inner alchemy, and what was it? DNA activations and a sacred marriage. And I get a sense from working with clients for a while now that a partnership with someone else isn't going to happen before, like a healthy one, before you have that inner sacred marriage. Would you agree with that?
Well, it's not just that, because you can have a healthy partnership for sure without facilitating an inner union within yourself. You can have a healthy human experience. So I don't want people to think that necessarily. But due to the nature of what is being created on the planet right now and the kind of era that we're moving into, the relating that's possible between sort of light leaders is of the Heroes Gamos template. So a lot of the human relationship models that we've had have been loosely based in trauma bonding, energy siphoning, and yes, often very unhealthy dynamics. And of course, repeating, childhood traumas and this kind of thing. So I do believe that those who are called, and you tend to have an inner knowing that you're here to embody this a very high timeline relational experience. And it's not like you meet someone who, you do meet someone who's a God embodiment as a counterpart and consort, but it's a reflection always of that awareness and anchoring within yourself. So part of that for the past couple of years for me has been addressing actually the toxic feminine. So women who are really dissociated from masculine energy because of some of the modern day feminist movement and some overlays and energetic distortions that happen to be in the sort of mainstream priestess movement. So any kind of retaliatory energy towards men is actually at odds with the true pure and highly innocent and purified relational grid that we're meant to experience and embody. So it's been a full year for me since being with that partner and now being in this space. And of course, it's all anointed. I don't bypass the ramifications and repercussions of being with someone who is not healthy or in a longer term way, maybe life enhancing is a better way to put it.
Ooh, I like that.
Because it's always mutual as well. You get to see your own, like for me, a lot of codependent stuff and just really some very, very hidden, sequestered away stuff that I wouldn't have gotten to if it weren't for this person who was perfectly kind of sanctioned for me to surface a lot of that stuff. So, yes, working on the Hieros Gamos within is what creates the possibility to experience it externally. And it's actually the template for the created consciousness. So, in order to realize unity consciousness, which is a term that I think a lot of people are confused about in many ways, because it's not just blind acceptance. It is really about committing to truth as your highest value. And from there, culling out any distortions in your own presence and the way that you show up to really be embodied as the highest possible expression of you. So that Hieros Gamos inner marriage is what begets the possibility to see that expressed through an individual. And therefore, then when we have that on a more planetary level, when we reach a critical mass of people who are doing that work, the scales really tip, which we've seen, but we're still in this process this year of just kind of evening things out, and there's a lot of shadow purging that's happening, to be honest.
Yeah.
So in some of that too is a lot of false light programming, even within some of our beautiful new earth communities, and it all serves a purpose. But you know, the lesson this year is about sovereignty and spiritual maturity. So that can only come from personal discernment and it really anchoring into a sense of self, which isn't possible if we're still operating from the codependent model of I can only know myself through other people, which is really about early attachment trauma on a grounded level. So
Freud, I'm like, oh, Freud's back when I'm when I'm doing a reading or something, and it's like I'm like, this is typical Freudian. You're with your dad. You're working out your daddy stuff. It's okay. We all do it at one point.
Well, actually, it's not just that. So
sure, it's never just one thing. It's so this is so complicated. Go ahead, explain.
Yeah, and you know, Carl Jung is actually a great resource as well. But the reason that we do that, and because it's true on the other side as well, men tend to choose partners that represent their mothers, and it's really about just the unhealed imbalance within ourselves. So again, if you've done a lot of goddess work or a lot of priestess work, but you don't have that masculine anchoring, you're walking around fatherless internally. So you tend to choose someone outside of you who best to your subconscious mind mimics what you know that to be, until you go in and do the work to create a healthy imprint, which is not something that we're taught. It's not something that we're raised to know, because of course, you know, when we stay in these trauma loops, our energy can be harvested, and you know, we stay traumatized and the world, you know, disempowered. So there's a lot happening right now.
There is. We're unraveling when you talked about the feminine movement and balancing the feminine, masculine, I thought about my mom who was over here earlier, and she was the original 80s, 90s when self-help books were popular, but she was the first, like, I'm a feminist. And what I notice now, being someone in my own life who is, especially because I have a teenager, I tend to be in all the roles, right? The mother, the father, the aunt, the uncle, the nurturer, like I'm in so many different roles. And I said, man, feminism really screwed this generation over, you know, by women going back into the workplace in the 80s. I mean, it was meant to be. And I know the pendulum swings both ways before it hits the middle. There's like that, you know, we were the 1950s housewife, and then we were like, we can do what men can do. And then me and all these women are like, but we don't want to do it all. We want to really focus on, you know, once we get the DNA activations and we know thyself, the way you're talking, you know, we find our own balance of where we land best, where we perform best. I feel like then does that make sense? Is that resonating? Like that pendulum swinging both ways, and then would the middle-ish be that alchemy you're talking about?
Yeah, and I think it's really important to say that because everything that's happened has been a step on the path. So I'm grateful to every woman who has played a role. And that's what we have to understand, I think, too, like really the Christed consciousness as well as going all the way up and having a higher perspective on things.
Mm-hmm.
So we do see the real-time ramifications of, you know, even biologically, the female body is not meant to work in the way that, we do in this culture. It's just not. And that's why there's so many hormonal issues with women right now, because we simply don't have the same level of testosterone to be pushing and to be building and to be going. And it's not necessarily that heavily directed focus is wrong. That is important to build things, but the female physical body can't sustain that for extended periods of time, and that's why a lot of people are burnt out. And it's not that we're deficient, it's that there's been a lot of intentional and implanted chaos around gender roles, all of it. And I think that really is a journey that internally has to just be explored. What is true for an individual? I know that for me, running a business as a female and very feminine business owner, I've gone on my own journey of, the seduction of whatever, running this huge empire or something, and not even being attached to that idea, but just how much that's being circulated as a form of empowerment for women.
Mm-hmm.
But when you really meet some of these people behind the scenes, and not to diminish anyone, but they're not healthy, they're not happy, they're not thriving, they're not well. And so it's an exploration as well. And what is the new paradigm of leading from a feminine place, doing business from a feminine place, relating to wealth from a feminine place, and also leaving room for partnered experience. And the idea that sacred union also involves two individuals that tend to come together with a common cause. So when we see more of these new kind of new earth relationships come together, it will often be the case that there's a shared vision of some kind. A lot of I would say, female millionaires on the planet right now who are still in their feminine essence and are maybe more balanced and healthy tend to have a husband who is running more of the logistical, like very numbers crunching or more business oriented side of things, so they can be creative and show up in the way that they need to. Right. Yeah.
Love that. I personally am with a galactic guardian. I think a lot of in my teachings of the Magdalene lineage, there's like 44,000 of us, and we're all, even though I do believe that we all have that essence in us, like you, but we're all put in these different places, and we're just like stationed right now, and we're deactivating people's DNA. And I've been planted in Columbus, Ohio, in suburbia, and I'm like, I really wish I would have picked the Costa Rica post about now, but so I'm here with this galactic guardian who he will do, like, since we've been on quarantine, I'm like, oh my gosh, I have, and I want to say that I wasn't running things and doing things from a place of like my mom's era of Nike, just do it, go. Like I see her so exhausted, and that hormonal imbalance you're talking about. Like I've done the work for this next generation. I know how to rest. I go to my Sangha and I know how to rest, but it still wasn't enough. And once we were put on quarantine, my body did this whole unraveling, and the things I create are like immaculate conception. I'm wondering if you could relate to this. It's just like, if I rest enough and if I'm in my juice, then I just get like that immaculate conception, like something bursts through me. I mean, I was like, no, thank you. I don't really have any more time to do anything else. But it was like, pew, pew, just it flowed. It really did flow. And so many things like that have happened in the last 5 years. It's like I get downloaded with something. It doesn't feel like work, it feels like like it feels inspired in spirit, like I'm co-creating with something much bigger.
Right.
And it's super exciting and juicy. Though I can say it's also too much sometimes. Like I still have to rest from that. So I have my partner who, you know, he doesn't want to like he'll do a little Layla Martin breath work with me. He's really cool, but he's still like, I don't want to do the emotional deep stuff. I'm just here to guard the energy while you transmit some of the stuff coming through you, because I am in a very, a pretty low vibrational space holding light here in Columbus.
Yeah. Yeah, like I speak to a few things in response to that. And one is that the 144, as you mentioned, is very real. And, you know, it's nothing more than kind of an agreement to be an anchor point. And so we do get shipped around to these like different locations and do a lot of grid work. I mean, living in New Mexico, I did a lot of transmuting constantly. There's so much grief in the land there. I'm now in North Carolina. And I've done similar work here, but it's more a place of rest for me right now during this period that we're undergoing, because it's so lush and it's very feminine here and abundant. And yes, it does feel like flow. The thing is, though, as you really are holding very large volumes of energy, that structural containment has to grow and grow and grow and grow. And I don't experience it as something, you definitely can channel it as one person, but that's of course why we get into delegation and growing and building teams, etc., etc. And it's a pathway of mastery. And it's a lot about also each individual working with their personal dharma and wounding and the piece of the collective story that they're supporting. So yeah, whatever the lessons are on that path. I always say that entrepreneurship is like the highest and wildest personal development program that there
Just the time management alone, right? Because for me, the time management is the father, right? Like I come in and I'm like, okay, Dawn, this is your list for the day. And then my inner feminine's like, no, I just want to do whatever I want. So the two parts have to talk to each other all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Raising a teenager is the other one. I mean, I just said on my last podcast, I was like, I have been to ashrams. I have done, the ayahuasca in the jungle. There is nothing like homeschooling a child in quarantine for my soul to develop. I had to face so many shadow parts, and I know there's lots of people out there that can relate to this. Like as soon as I think that, and same with the trauma that came up at the beginning of the pandemic that we're in now, like it reactivated a lot of people's trauma from old wounds in their DNA. Did you notice that as well?
Yeah, I watch things and I tend not to get involved in them because, of course, I have this, I guess, my signpost is holding a particular frequency. But that was all kind of necessary. And when we look at the larger picture of this year and the alchemical process that we are going through, that tension is important and it's going to build as well. There are going to be other points where we're really entering into quite an intense pressure and heat in some ways, and it's individual and collective. But I think in most cases, those who are here to be more stewarding the process have also done some pre-work. So we've gotten a lot of this transmutation out of the way in advance to some degree so that it is not less intense, but a little bit later, so you can be more of a witness.
Yeah.
And that has to do also with, in some cases, just being an older soul. So there's less of that grappling with what is the human experience? Why am I here? How do I make sense of this? I hate this place, whatever comes up for people.
And the sky daddy thing, you were speaking a little bit to this earlier, I believe, but the growing spiritually, there's so many people, like in my state, I sometimes will click on the governor's report and there's literally hundreds of people going, you did this, you aren't handling this pandemic well. And there's people that still believe that they're just one force in the sky. And then what makes you really sad is that they're punishing them, that they're being punished. and or that things will go back. And I agree. When I look, I see segments in the future. This is all just a breaking down to build something else, but it's kind of happening at the same time. Like the breakdown and the build are happening at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the nature of multidimensionality, right? And that's an initiation for everyone too. Like what's available right now is an initiation. That's part of the Christed path, is holding multiple viewpoints simultaneously. So any kind of even like superiority, which happens a lot on social media, like this is the one way, this is the only truth, this is the
I can't handle that.
and that's not, there's so many levels to what's going on dimensionally and timeline wise, and they're all choice points, and actually one is not necessarily better than the other. They have ramifications, and so that is that's a judgment call for each human, for each soul to make. But we're all sovereign beings at the end of the day. It's like everyone's trying to police each other, but it's very amusing when you have a different perspective. And in many ways people are self-governing and they're free to do what they want, despite we have these real world structures to govern people and prevent them from doing crazy things. But the human nature is, energetically, people are going to express their shadow, even and especially when they try to suppress it or pretend that it's not there. So it's going to come out in some disjointed ways potentially throughout the year, especially if people aren't consciously addressing it, or even in some cases just feeling safe to be with those parts of themselves,
and having the education. I think my vision is to have people such as yourself here on this show, so that people can just get little nuggets of how to transmute that shadow. I mean, I know regression leads to oppression and depression and being depressed, getting aggressive, and like how, finding ways to deal with that. There's a lot of people just don't know how. Again, going back to like my mom's self-help books, I look at those and I'm like, oh my gosh, that wasn't the way. The way for me, the way of alchemy is that parenting piece, like parenting yourself, finding the feminine, the rest, and the flow, like finding the balance between the two, and then just loving the dark stuff instead of going, I've got to fix this, or this part about me just sucks, instead of that, I just go, yeah, you ate a tray of gluten-free brownies because you didn't. Oh, Dawn, I'm gonna love the shit out of you anyways. Like that's where I get the most alchemy. But that seems like a revolutionary concept when I share it with people. A lot of people are still in them. I want to be perfect. I want to be perfect. Have you noticed that, or do you have any kind of commentary on that?
It's a careful balance, because there is a level of growth and sophistication and maturity that's really important. We've really devolved in some ways as a culture and a society, even down to basic things like etiquette and manners. And I don't mean that from a place of, that there's necessarily a perfect way of being, but just basic human decency and respect, I think, is something that's really kind of fallen by the wayside. So it is, for me personally, yes, it's very much, self-parenting, although I consider that to be, definitely part of the weaving of the alchemical process, but very much energetic. And it can be really simple. The three, things that are really important when working with a human body are the breath, the sound, and the movement. And because, a lot of times the somatic experience gets left out of the healing process, especially like you've referenced a couple times the self-help books and the personal development, and people can get addicted to this, but it's all in your head. It's all just in the head. So I've met so many times people who have a lot of knowledge, right? They've read a lot of books, they've attended seminars, but there's not an embodiment. And it's interesting actually, because as I kind of start to open up my field a little bit to receive male suitors, I've seen this a few times also. just the body is left out of the conversation, I feel like, on both sides of the equation, and that's a really important part of shadow work. I don't think anyone we're not doing shadow work unless the body is involved, in my opinion. So it is the reparenting, it's the rewiring of the beliefs. It is, go to the seminars and read the books, do the things that you feel called to do, but connecting with the body is the most important command center, because that'll tell you too, in the way you're speaking to yourself, are you actually feeling more contracted, or are you feeling emboldened, empowered, and capable, in wanting to move forward? Because part of that parenting too is having boundaries for ourselves. And this is something I feel I always am reiterating, which is internal boundaries. So
Mm.
knows, like, I create boundaries with other people. I, create them in my life, but internal boundaries is something I see, especially a lot of women struggle with, which is, holding yourself accountable, having clarity around how you will and will not speak to yourself, for example, or what you'll allow yourself to think about or get lost in. Because
Mhm.
our coping mechanisms in the feminine tend to be a lot of times getting lost in fantasy, kind of like going swimming in, um, yeah, kind of like daydreaming and just not getting really grounded, because that's an avoidance mechanism.
Mm.
So, esoterically, that transmutation process has levels that I feel tie into different aspects of what the work is, that's more tangible.
That makes sense. I love that. Get the knowledge, and then you somatically. I know I worked with a somatic trauma resolution practitioner for 6 years in my 20s because the trauma was like, this cannot fix everything. But I love that. It's a great point. The mind, it does begin there, has to understand. So in MVC, I do some training, or I've been studying MVC for like 6 years, and they have the giraffe totem. The giraffe is like super tall, has the biggest heart, the most compassion, 35 or 36-pound heart, biggest of all land mammals, but they see all the different perspectives. So I don't have, how do I want to say this? I also invite in our listeners to look at, where they're believing something is just this, and then looking at the other perspective, opening up to perspectives. Is there a somatic way that people could do that? Like, you said something about breath, maybe a breath practice that can open people up and get them out of their minds, or?
Yeah, so that's the breath work that I teach and facilitate is pretty much expressly for that. And it is a quantum healing practice, although my teacher would never call it that. So many of these terms get really trendy, and just careful, I think, with, where that gets associated. But really working with your physical body can be as simple as the mindfulness practice. And this is why mindfulness is so healing, not just
Mhm.
for stress reduction, but for literally changing your entire experience of life. Moment by moment, most of us are walking around completely on autopilot. We have no idea what we're feeling in our physical form most of the time. And it does come a bit more naturally to women, I think, because we're such sensual embodiments or feminine beings. But it's true for everyone. Just even in conversation is a great time to start practicing. It can be a cue to notice how you feel, around someone when you're out in the world, when you're talking with a friend. Just noticing, like, where's your heart rate at? How's your breath? Is there tension in your body? But even simple stuff like before you go to sleep, doing body scans, just starting to befriend the body again, because that is where sovereignty begins, and I would even say ends. I would say sovereignty just comes back to the physical form immensely, because God is always communicating in our intuition, whatever the belief systems are, through the physical vessel. And that's one of the gifts of being human, I feel, is that there is a constant feedback loop. And sometimes we're having trauma responses that are not necessarily related to a true imminent threat, but we're being triggered or we're re-experiencing something. And that's still important information, perhaps even more so. around just, where we need to slow down and be really tender with ourselves in many ways. But yeah, the breath work is so important. And yeah, anyone who's curious about that can connect with me. Um, but really, any breath work is helpful, to be honest. It's kind of like an energy hygiene practice as well. The body just needs to, it can't be stagnant. And that's why a lot of sickness occurs in our culture, because we're really quite bizarre in the way we're conducting ourselves right now, that really it leads to sickness and just depression. So we need to move, we need to be around each other, which ironically we're talking during this pandemic. But
I know, and the Zoom thing is so real. The Zoom, what is it? Zoom fatigue.
yeah. Yeah.
Well, I am noticing that the time is kind of rounding out. I love that you spoke to the breathwork piece. That made me so happy because that's not something I offer. And I am loving that one of the goals of this show is to cross pollinate. And, I can send people to you if my intuition and their intuition says, oh my gosh, she's really, needing to do some breath work with you or he. So I'm going to post all that in with this. Is there any last thoughts you want to share, or any of your information or anything you feel inspired to share?
Sure. I am so grateful to have chatted with you today. Thank you. And it was an honor. And anyone who wants to connect further, the best place to find me is on Instagram, and it's at Astera Ilhiana, AsteraIlhiana. And that's kind of where all my links are, and you can find more info and all of that good stuff.
Excellent. I just adore you. I always have. I think you're the cat's meow. I was writing all these different terms. I was like, she's brave, she's unique, she's authentic. And I appreciate you so much for taking some time for the New Era Awakening show.
Thank you.
All right. Let me end the recording.